Hi, I'm Arnie Gundersen from Fairwinds, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Palisades plant, the impact on the local community, and the overall impact on the state of Michigan. If you're taking notes, Gundersen has an E in it, and Fairwinds has an E in the middle of it. So a little bit of a personal speed date here. I'll tell you about my background. Bachelor, master's in nuclear, way back in the day. I was a senior vice president in the nuclear industry, became a whistleblower. And then since then, I've been an expert witness with non-governmental organizations like Don't Waste Michigan and others. And I've written a book, a bestseller in Japan on Fukushima, and I've also published 3 peer-reviewed papers. All right, but the important thing here to remember today is that my father was a carpenter. And the reason I'm saying that is because he had a saying, a little putty and a little paint will make things look like what they ain't. And that's what's happening at the Palisades plant. And hopefully I can explain a little bit about that over the next 15 minutes or so. So what Holtec, the present owner of Palisades, is doing is really trying to patch up and paint the Palisades plant and get it ready for restart at the end of 2025. And I believe 2 things will happen if that happens. The first is that it'll jeopardize the communities living near the plant from a safety standpoint, and it will also dramatically raise the rates in Michigan for electricity. So let me tell you why. The construction of Palisades and the engineering behind it began in 1964, and that was back before computers and handheld calculators. That was back in slide rule and pencil era. So the Palisades plant was one of the first plants designed, and I was in 10th grade, and I'm 75 now, so it was a long time ago. So the design was only approved to last 40 years. So it came online in 1971, and by then I had gotten my bachelor's and master's in nuclear. And the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, gave it a 40-year license. So they said it was good to go between 71 and 2011. That 2011 date's an important one to remember. So over the first 40 years, Palisades had its share of problems. It was certainly in the worst 20% of the 100 nuclear power plants out there. When it was built, the engineers didn't know how to weld a nuclear reactor together, and they used the wrong welding material. So Palisades and about 5 other reactors have the wrong welding material holding the nuclear reactor together, and that's not good. It gets brittle under radiation and can crack, almost shatter like glass, unless the operators behave perfectly. So we're talking about a 64 design that's 59 years old, and Holtec is trying to get it running again. But I think it's important to remember that Palisades was already licensed to run until 2031, yet Entergy shut it down last year. So what happened? Why did Entergy do that? And the reason is it was uneconomical. Entergy was getting a power purchase agreement with the state to sell its power at a premium compared to what else was going on in the state. So the power from Palisades was already the most expensive power in Michigan. And so when that agreement terminated in 2022, Entergy pulled the plug and left. It made no economic sense to run Palisades in the competitive market that with renewables that's out there right now. So it was not economical, probably for years before 2022, but the power purchase agreement made Entergy stay in the game. Now, Entergy knew it was closing the plant in 2022, and it deferred maintenance. It's like putting tires on your car. If you know you're going to get rid of it or it's going to die in a year, you're not going to put a new set of tires on it. Well, the capital costs of nukes are hundreds of millions of dollars, and the payback period is over 20 years. So Entergy never made the maintenance modifications to keep the plant running. So what we've got at Palisades right now is a reactor with the wrong welds. The steam generators, they're a huge component that costs about $500 million. They were on their last legs when Entergy closed the plant, and they haven't been properly maintained since then. So likely, if the plant were to shut up, they would fail, and that would cause a radiation release along the banks of Lake Michigan. The other thing is, it's always needed a new head, and that's like the top of a pressure cooker. It's been known for about a decade that the head, the top of the nuclear reactor, needed to be replaced, and Entergy didn't do that. And then there's a long history of the control rod drive module problems. I won't bore you with the details. But anyway, they walked away from it without making any of those modifications because it made no economic sense to keep the plant running when the modifications were going to be on their dime. Now, what's most important is that remember 2011 rather, that's when the 40-year license ended. Entergy applied for a 20-year extra extension. So 2011 to 2031, they committed to do extra inspections. And because they didn't deny that the plant was degrading, they were just going to monitor how fast it degrades. Those of us who are getting old know you got to go to the doctor more often. And they had a plan to stay on top of the degradation that everybody knows existed. Well, they walked away from that plan too. So for the last year plus, they have not been monitoring the degradation of the plant. That's a problem. The other thing is when they shut it down, they should have added chemicals to the water if they were going to start it back up again to prevent all the internal components from rusting. They didn't do that. Why? Because they were going to close it down and sell it for scrap. They should have, if they were going to start it up, kept a large steam turbine constantly rotating so it didn't develop a bow. They didn't do that. They should be, even now, moving the valves in and out to make sure that they don't seize up, and what we call bumping the pumps, turning the pumps on and off to make sure that they don't seize up. They did none of that. So all of those precautions were not taken because Entergy had no idea that the plant was going to be started up rather. The shutdown was an economic decision. Made no sense to do any of those. So the other thing they didn't do was buy fuel. It's not like your car. You can drive down to the gas station and get a tank of gas. It takes about 2 years to build the fuel for a nuclear plant. So the fuel they could have put in 2022 would have had to be bought back in 2020, and they didn't. So if they're going to start this plant up again, if Holtec is going to start this plant up again, all those things that I just talked about have to be puttied and painted over because they're not going to make the economic decisions to keep that plant running again. Remember, if Palisades starts up, say 2026, it only has 5 more years before the NRC is going to shut it down again. So all those big capital improvement modifications that I was talking about, Holtec is not going to make because they can't get their money back on an already uneconomical reactor. On top of that, they didn't buy fuel, so there's 2 or 3 years to buy the fuel, and they let the intelligence of the plant walk out the door when they fired everybody. The nuclear reactor operators are gone. It takes 2+ years to train operators. The engineers are gone. The maintenance staff is gone, and the institutional memory those people had walked out the door. And that's not something you can develop in 2 years. When the plant starts up, it's going to have a very green staff, and they won't be used to running this plant like the old timers that were left behind. So every one of those technicians had critical understanding of how that plant operated, and they're all gone. So the important thing then is after Entergy shut it down, they sold it to Holtec, and Holtec has never operated a nuclear reactor, never. They're a demolition contractor. They knock power plants down for money. So they got a boatload of money in the decommissioning fund, and their job was to knock it down and sell it for scrap or send it to a nuclear waste dump. So they had no staff to do anything else. They brought in demolition staff. So it's simple. There were no skills to keep it running, and the contractor's basis for buying it was to destroy the plant. And then for some reason, the state of Michigan and the Department of Energy decided that they were going to ask Palisades to keep running. And Holtec said, well, if you give me enough money, I'll try to get it started again. Remember, though, this plant made no economic sense in 2022, and it's going to make less economic sense in 2025 as the investment in getting Palisades up and running is significant, and the cost of renewables is still plummeting. So a good question to ask is, why is the state doing this? The Holtec has some real serious hurdles to go over before they get this plant running. The first is they have to convince the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to give them the license back. Now, they got their license on the Entergy terminated the license in 2022. It's not a licensed nuclear reactor anymore. And Holtec is going to wave its magic wand and convince the NRC that there's no impediments to starting Palisades back up, despite the litany that I just gave you. The other big important hurdle is they've got to get a state subsidy. So even though the state is going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars getting Palisades back up to operating condition, they're not going to be competitive when the plant turns on and enters the market. So they need a power purchase agreement that Entergy never had. Entergy walked away because it didn't have a power purchase agreement. They have to re-inspect the entire facility and putty and paint over the components that have degraded, but they're not going to make those major investments that I just discussed. So what that means for a city like Palisades Park or any of the communities is that when that plant starts back up, it's going to be less safe. The people don't know what they're doing, and the plant has aged and degraded. So it rises to the top of my list of the plants most likely to have radiation releases. And I don't think anybody in Palisades Park or the surrounding communities want that. Or in Michigan. Let me remind you that the radioactive plume from Fukushima traveled 150 miles, and the prevailing winds are from Palisades across Michigan. So with a 6-year investment horizon and with no economic there's no economic reality that they're going to suddenly become cost competitive. They're going to make decisions to putty and paint over the problems and not fix the plant so that it's ready to run forward. Now, Holtec is a limited liability company. They don't have any assets except the money that's in the fund. So that's why they're asking for hundreds of millions of dollars from the state of Michigan. They need that grant to even begin to accomplish the overhaul of Palisades. And frankly, I think they're going to need a lot more money, and it's going to take a lot more time than what they've committed to. Now, Holtec's chief financial officer recently filed a whistleblower complaint and sued Holtec because the president of Holtec, he claims, was asking him to inflate the balance sheets by $750 million. So we've got an undercapitalized company with a president who is willing to force his chief financial officer to overinflate their assets for his own personal aggrandizement. And there's no guarantee that this plant's going to start up after the state of Michigan gives Palisades another $300 million. And there's no guarantee it will start up on time. So in summary, building that plant again, rebuilding it, is going to put the Palisades Park community at risk, the surrounding communities at risk, and the state of Michigan at risk. Holtec has never designed, never constructed, and never operated a nuclear power plant. And yet you're giving the oldest plant with the worst welds to Holtec to operate. That doesn't, in my mind, give me a feeling of confidence. It's doubtful the repairs will be completed on time, and certainly within the budget that Michigan has proposed. And Palisades management, Holtec, has no intention of dipping into their coffers to move forward. So it's going to be another public handout at the end of this. And finally, when it comes online, one, it's going to be risky, and two, it's going to be the most expensive power source in the state of Michigan. So I would advise the people in Palisades Park to contact their representatives and say, why the heck are you doing this? It makes no economic sense, and you're jeopardizing my safety in the process.